Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home Circular Economy presented by the Desjardins Group. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'm really excited to be joining you virtually, bringing together people from across the country and around the world. The Walrus continues to spark conversations on the issues that matter most to Canadians. I'd also like to acknowledge the land that I'm on here in Toronto, Toronto. I come to you from the territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Petun First Nations, the Seneca and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And Toronto has long been a meeting place of Indigenous peoples, and we're really honored to carry on a long tradition of conversation. What I'd like to do right now is ask all of us to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, the unique moment in history that we're in, and our collective commitment to reconciliation. Thank you for joining me in doing that. The Walrus started 17 years ago as an optimistic project to tell stories and foster conversation across Canada. And we do this in many ways. We do it through fact-based journalism, which you can find in our print publication and online daily at thewalrus.ca, through our podcasts, The Conversation Piece, and in our public events series, The Walrus Talks. Now, The Walrus Talks at Home. And our work is powered by our donors, by our supporters and our partners. So thank you all for being here and being a part of this. And again, to Desjardins Group for making it possible. To start tonight's conversation, please welcome Desjardins Group's President and CEO, Guy Cormier.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. I'm Guy Cormier, President and CEO of Desjardins Group. I want to thank everyone who's watching. I also want to thank the Walrus for organizing this discussion on circular economy. And thank you to all the great speakers tonight who made time to discuss this very important subject. Over the past few months, our society has seen a lot of change. Some of our priorities have shifted and others have been shattered. Capitalism, as we know, had a tremendous impact on our society, and it has also caused a lot of collateral damage. Getting the economy back on its feet will be a challenge. It's going to look a little different from one place to another. But overall, I really think this is an opportunity to show we can do better. It's time to come up with some innovative solutions to past problems, to build an economy that is focused on sustainability for the long term rather than quarterly results. For Desjardins Group, we have been there for people and communities for 120 years, and we're going to keep being there for them. And it's why we worked with the Walrus to bring this talk to you, because only by working together through collaboration and cooperation can we rebuild better, to focus on the best interest of our future generation. We need to think and act responsibly for our communities, our businesses, our environment, our society, our future. For the benefit of all, this shared prosperity is crucial to our socio-economic success. This is how I see us creating a better tomorrow. So thank you all again for coming, and thank you to our speakers for sharing your expertise in the important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. The conversation around the circular economy is increasingly important in Canada and abroad. It's basically a system aimed at eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. So it reuses, it repairs, it refurbishes, it remanufactures, and it recycles to create a closed loop. So in the spirit, actually, tonight, this is from a clothing swap that I was a part of. We're going to be hearing from 4 industry leaders on how large-scale institutions in finance and business and in tech sectors can lead the way to a more sustainable economic future. This is how the event's going to work. There will be 4 speakers offering 4 different perspectives on the subject of the circular economy. They each have 5 minutes. And then once your head is full of new ideas, we'll have a moderated Q&A session with the speakers and you at home, the audience. The Walrus Talks at Home Circular Economy is also an official side event of the World Circular Economy Forum 2020. This is a global event that brings together key circular economy thinkers and doers from all over the world. Thank you to Citra for partnering with us. Tonight, we'll be hearing from the Director of Circular Economy at the Smart Prosperity Institute, Stephanie Cairns, the Head of Sustainable Impact at HP Canada, Francis Edmonds, the Senior Business Writer and Columnist at the Globe and Mail, Rita Trichur, and CEO and founder of Indigenous Institute, Carol Ann Hilton. Thank you all for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Stephanie Cairns. My pronouns are she, her, and I work with the Smart Prosperity Institute. Like many, I can get overwhelmed by environmental anxiety, about the climate crisis, about the mass loss of species, and also about how society can provide good and meaningful jobs that take care of the planet for future generations. But today I want to share a vision of hope, a vision of an emerging approach for meeting future human needs and creating jobs and prosperity while caring for the planet. It's called the circular economy, and it's set to replace our current linear take, make, waste economic system. Right now, we have an industrial system largely designed for a time 200 years ago when the world had 8 times less people, resources seemed plentiful, and frontiers knew no horizon. Today, more than 90% of the resources which are extracted for the global economy are used once only and then disposed of. And it's not only the materials that are thrown out, it's also the water, energy, pollution, and land use impacts invested in them. This highly wasteful model is harmful to the environment and unsustainable in the long term. It's also a missed economic opportunity because valuable materials are literally being thrown away. For example, every year in Canada, post-consumer plastic valued at $8 billion goes to landfill, and $50 billion worth of preventable food waste is lost, and so on. But an alternative way to do things is emerging, a circular economy. It draws inspiration from the natural world, where materials cycle infinitely in one form or other, and there's no such thing as waste, only resource. This circular economy would transform how we produce, use, and consume goods to keep materials cycling in the economy, creating jobs and prosperity through less wasteful products and lifestyles. It would decouple economic growth from expanding resource use, consuming less land, less water, less energy, and fewer raw materials, creating less pollution, and being powered by renewable energy. It would capture significant economic value from what is now considered garbage and waste. Here are a few examples. Loop is a company that is rethinking the design of how to deliver consumer goods. It describes itself as yesterday's milkman reimagined for the modern world. Food and consumer items from major brands are ordered online and delivered to your door, packaged in refillable containers. Once the containers are empty, customers arrange for a pickup. The containers are sanitized, refilled, and the cycle begins again. Waste is reduced, consumers get convenience, and brands strengthen consumer loyalty. Reuse, recovery, and recycling of byproducts and waste while keeping these materials at their highest and best use is another key circular strategy. For example, waste heat from industry can be piped into greenhouses to supply fresh local produce in remote communities. Or circular supply chains which use fully renewable, recyclable, or biodegradable materials in consecutive life cycles are another strategy. A fascinating example is the International Buildings as Material Banks Collaborative, which is working to design buildings that can be easily disassembled and the materials infinitely reused or refurbished in new building projects. We can also make more intense use of the products we have manufactured through approaches such as the product as a service business model. For example, Mud Jeans leases blue jeans on a monthly payment plan, upcycles the returned jeans, or shreds worn out ones and blends them into virgin cotton for the next generation of jeans. By leasing the service of a product rather than the product itself, companies are aligning profit models to product longevity, reliability, and reusability, while maintaining the ownership of their raw materials and getting them back after use. To be clear, circular economy strategies on their own can't support all future demand for materials, because not all primary materials are fully recyclable at the end of life, and because growing population, affluence, and advanced technologies are expected to combine to double demand for materials by 2060. But nor can this demand be sustainably supported with primary materials alone. A circular economy is therefore a foundation for future material, environmental, and economic security. Some of these changes will be simple. Some will require system-wide transformation and new legal and business models. But rethinking the value of what we now treat as waste and redesigning our systems of production and use to retain secondary, cycled materials in the economy is a transition that requires tremendous system-wide innovation, bold action, and decision-making. But I hope you'll agree that it's an exciting and hopeful vision and one well worth striving for. Thank you.
Hello, Frances Edmonds here. Just want to say a little thank you to both the Walrus Talks and to Desjardins for sponsoring this event. So you've heard about the circular economy from Stephanie, and I'm going to cover circular procurement. Basically, buying the future we want. In this critical decade of climate action, we need to pull out all of the tools in our toolbox to tackle the climate catastrophe. As a 30-year sustainability practitioner, I've concluded that we need to use the capitalist systems framework to make the change we need, specifically focusing on procurement and buying the future that we all want. Every dollar that we spend, both at home and at work, sends a signal into the marketplace. HP recently funded some research through Schulich School of Business into how Canadian governments at all levels across the country are integrating this concept into their buying. The research looked at bids over $1 million in 3 categories of spend. And despite a commitment from the federal government in the throne speech over 25 years ago to do green procurement, you may be shocked to find that we spend our taxpayers' money, that's 13% of GDP, with virtually no sustainable or circular requirements. Even myself, I find that lure of cheap, upfront, low-cost items to be very seductive until I catch myself. If this quote adopted from Ray Anderson says it all, the fastest way to green your organization is to purchase from one that's already greened theirs. Why are we not using this powerful tool to buy the future we want, and in particular in a post-COVID recovery? We've effectively been seduced to focus on the lowest price as representative of the true value of things. In pushing for that, we have accelerated the linear economy with all its warts, externalities like slave labor, disposable products, and burgeoning landfills. Interestingly enough, we have not continued to leverage the dollar as a proxy and look at all the costs as we use and ultimately dispose of the goods we buy. Time to reset our thinking. Total costs, including maintenance, repair, end of life, and operating costs, need to be counted in, getting best value overall, which of course includes all of these elements. So here's the definition of circular procurement that I use. Buying the most circular service or good, and you'll note I flipped those, from the most circular supplier. Both for the things that we are buying and who we are buying from are critical in driving the market transformation we need, and often we only focus on the actual good. So this is all a bit theoretical. Let me give you an example. HP has made a commitment to take our entire business circular. This is not just about designing products better, though that's certainly a critical first step, but offering our products as a service. Changing how we provide computing and printing power to our customers, switching to as-a-service models, requires many changes across the company. Sustainability is a team sport, and now that team also includes you, our customers. Take, for instance, our home ink printers, a commoditized product that a typical customer expects to be able to buy for $49.99. You can't make a high-quality printer for that price. So the printer gets sold at a loss, and companies make up their profits on the ink cartridges that go in them, making them seem high-priced, which is a disincentive to use the product, not a smart consumer or business proposition. This is a typical circular economy conundrum, particularly in commoditized marketplaces. Excuse me. How do you break out of a less than desirable market, stay in business, and lower your sustainability impact? So HP's come up with a solution, and I wish I had thought of this because it's brilliant. It's called HP Instant Ink. It's a subscription service based on how many pages you want to print. It starts with a low-cost service. You can buy 50 pages a month for $3.99 a month. If you don't print all of those pages, they carry over to the next month. If you print a few more, you pay a little more, or you can go up into a higher plan. It's very flexible. And the really great part about this is you never have to think about ink again. Your printer orders the ink, it gets shipped to you in less packaging, in bigger cartridges, and with a recycling bag in the box, which is fantastic because we get more cartridges back for recycling, and we put that through our closed loop plastics recycling process, which is based right here in Canada, in Montreal. And of course, that helps contribute to our 30%, very aggressive 30% post-consumer recycled plastic content across our entire product portfolio by 2025. So we need all the help we can get on that. Instant Ink is the world's fastest growing business to consumer play in the circular economy, and it's growing at double digits. And we anticipate by this year end, we'll have 8 million subscribers worldwide. So it works. And why is this? Well, it's good for the customer, it's cheaper and more convenient, good for the business with a steady annuity stream, and it's good for the planet as it has reduced materials consumption by 57%, decreased energy use by 86%, and decreased carbon footprint by 84%. This is really showing you that you can hit a very sweet spot, leveraging the circular economy, satisfying business and customer and sustainability needs. It's really a very good example of how well this can work. But those numbers, excuse me, seem a little unbelievable, right? So we checked out other service-based models using the tool of peer-reviewed life cycle assessments, comparing owning products to accessing the service of them. Even we were surprised to find that the impacts are lower across all of the measured areas. This almost never happens when you're using this tool. You can get the white paper on this, and I've shared the URL with the Walrus team. So to summarize, circular procurement is, in my mind, the best tool we have to make the changes that we need fast enough to get our emissions down, whilst also considering socio-economic elements. And I'd like to end with this quote: "Without circular procurement, your sustainability work will be just seen as window dressing." And that comes from TCO Certified. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rita Trichur. I'm a business columnist with the Globe and Mail here in Toronto. I'll be talking about the circular economy from a financial services perspective. While the issue of climate change is certainly not new, I would say the concept of a circular economy is still a relatively novel concept for the financial services industry. At this present time, there's no comprehensive roadmap for banks, insurance companies, or institutional investors. And I would say that policymakers and regulators are still trying to wrap their heads around what climate change means for banks, the risk that it poses to the entire system, and the types of solutions that they're going to need to employ. Given the economic crisis created by this COVID-19 pandemic, I would expect that this process is going to take many more years. Perhaps the biggest challenge, though, is that many in the financial services industry still consider climate change to strictly be an environmental issue. Obviously, it's a business issue too. Increasingly, it is about smart risk management. it is about corporate governance, and it's about economic growth. One aspect of the circular economy is sustainable finance, and some Canadian banks have set targets. But there have been some snags. National Bank of Canada, for instance, has talked about how it's had trouble finding enough renewable energy projects in Canada to finance. So it's decided to finance more of these projects in the United States and Europe. Investment banks have also been issuing green bonds, but there are still lingering concerns about greenwashing, basically that it's a marketing gimmick, basically slapping a green label on regular debt. But other developments, I would say, have raised the bar on green financing in Canada. For instance, Bank of Montreal issued Canada's first sustainably linked loan to Maple Leaf Foods in the last year. And normally corporate credit lines or credit facilities are structured in such a way that they come with a fixed interest rate. This was different because it gave Maple Leaf Foods the ability to lower its interest rate by hitting specific targets, such as electricity use, water use, or reducing its emissions. Canada, though, in the big picture, is still a bit player with respect to green finance. But there are steps that Ottawa can take to improve Canada's ability to compete. So this is a perpetual ask of mine, and it's that we create a national securities regulator in Canada. It's good for a number of reasons, but I would say that one of the benefits here is that it would improve the efficiency of Canada's green bond market. The other thing it would do is it would look at the issue of climate change from a systemic risk perspective, which is something that we really need to do. A national securities regulator could also create a common set of rules with respect to climate change disclosures for publicly traded companies. At present, these disclosures are made on a volunteer basis. Canada could also create financial incentives, such as offering tax deductions to encourage ordinary Canadians to invest in green projects through their RRSPs. But Canada also needs to create clearer standards for what we consider to be green or sustainable when it comes to investments. And ordinary investors also need to have more choices. We need to have more choices as to where to put our money. There are currently some low carbon funds and environmentally themed investments, but climate-friendly funds may not always include Canadian stocks. And that could be a roadblock for some investors because investing in the home market is important to some people. Regulators will also need to make sure that Canadians aren't being gouged on fees when it comes to these green investments. Progress on all of these issues is likely to be delayed because of the current economic crisis. Banks are bracing for loan losses. This is going to be an issue that could impact their ability to offer sustainable financing. And although Canada's banking regulator does not dictate business decisions to the banks, it does monitor credit risk. Small business loans, including providing funding for clean tech startups, are generally considered more risky because most new businesses fail. And the other major issue is that Canadian banks are also major lenders to the oil sands. It's simply not in the bank's interest to abandon the oil sands. And it is in their interest to support new pipeline projects that will allow energy companies to ship crude to new markets and to remain profitable. There are also other obstacles. We're going to have to rethink and get creative when it comes to bank financing for electric vehicles. So right now, banking regulators are concerned about longer term auto loans that span 6, 7, or 8 years, because ultimately we're talking about a depreciating asset. So at the end of the day, an electric car too is a depreciating asset, and household debt is a major risk to the financial system. Green financing only works if it is pragmatic for banks. It has to stand up to normal lending standards to be really sustainable without introducing undue risk. It is really dangerous to politicize banking. And we've seen this happen in Europe, where very recently banking regulators and politicians have had a dust up over the capital rules for green loans. Some of the politicians have wanted to relax capital standards to encourage green investments in Europe, but the banking regulators have pushed back, saying that basically these capital rules should reflect the amount of risk that banks take. Now, that same logic does hold true in Canada. I don't believe that we should be mucking around with risk weights, but that doesn't mean that these challenges that face the industry are insurmountable. We just need, as I said earlier, to get creative and to look at this in a new way. We need more lateral thinking about this in the financial services industry because it has a role to play in the circular economy. And we absolutely need buy-in from Bay Street to meet our climate goals because we really cannot afford the risk of inaction on climate change. Thank you.
Uklasish Caroline Hilton. I come from the Heshkoyet Nation of the New Channel people. I come from 10,000 years of the potlatch tradition, 10,000 years of giving and distribution of wealth within a circular relational economy. Indigenomics is the collective response to the systemic exclusion of Indigenous peoples in the building of Canada's economy today. Indigenomics is building pathways towards inclusion within the economy and Canada's future. Indigenomics is modern Indigenous economic design. It is constructive, generative economic design. Indigenous peoples are the only people in Canada who have had to fight for the right to an economy itself. It is in this weighted relationship that Canada has with Indigenous peoples that there is a place to begin to understand and look at Indigenous worldview within economy. Within my own New Channel tradition, there is a concept called Hishuk Ish Tsawak. Everything is one and interconnected. Everything is one, Hishuk Ish Tsawak. To care for is Uatlak, and respect is Isak. These are the design principles within our Indigenous economy. These design principles are social in nature, they're spiritual in nature, they are embedded within stewardship and life and ecology and connects to the meaning of the unity of life itself. Indigenomics is designing for Indigenous inclusion. It is designing for the current poverty levels experienced by Indigenous peoples, the structures of dependency, and a return to meaning shaped within the natural world. The place of Indigenomics within the structure and the emerging circular economy. Indigenous economy, as expressed through Indigenomics, is the original green economy, is the original regenerative economy, collaborative economy, impact economy. Indigenomics is the gift economy and the social economy. At the center of this concept of an Indigenous economy is ceremony, which is a form of collaboration, protocol, and agreement within both the physical and spiritual realms. Ceremony expresses to us and confirms relationships with others, and everything around us can be acknowledged. It confirms the individual as neither the source nor the power. It is the economy behind the economy, which is the real marketplace. It is this connection of relationships that forms accountability and relationality, or relational economics. This is the essence behind the circular economy. Indigenomics is the 7th generation economy. It's decision-making for the long term. It's decision-making for impact and the circularity of the connectivity of all life. In coming to this concept of regenerative economy, it must be embedded within the concept of regeneration that the circular economy must be built upon. A function of the circular economy must establish the mechanism to make room for. It is this concept of making room for, who is sitting at the economic table. Is there Indigenous representation? It is this place or this invitation that the success of the circular economy must be built from. To understand Indigenomics as a concept of modern Indigenous economic design, creating the pathways for an inclusive economy, this is the foundation of what the circular economy must be able to create. Let's have the courage to do this together. Thank you, and who wants to play Indigenomics?
Thank you so much, Carol Ann, Rita, Francis, and Stephanie. Now, taking a look, we have audience members registered from all over: Vancouver, Fredericton, Calgary, Winnipeg, Whitehorse, Iqaluit, Gatineau, as well as Mumbai, Dublin, Melbourne, Jakarta, and beyond. Thank you so much again, everyone, for coming together for this event. It is now time for our Q&A session. If you have a question to ask it, go ahead and type it in the Zoom chat box. Our moderator this evening is Managing Editor Adria Vasil from Corporate Knights Magazine, the voice for clean capitalism. Over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. It is a pleasure to be here tonight and moderate this conversation on the circular economy. I get a little too excited about this topic. Not everyone does, but I think I'm in good company here with the panel, and many of you would feel the same way. Now, my first question is for Stephanie. Before joining this panel, I was chatting about it with somebody, telling them about the circular economy. They hadn't heard it before, and they said, oh, this sounds amazing. It's so inspiring. Why aren't we doing it yet? And it's a good question. I didn't really know how to answer it. So I thought maybe, Stephanie, you could take a stab at that.
Well, I think that what's new here is the big vision of that's been put forward from the circular economy. I think that actually we've got bits and pieces of the circular economy happening around us already, but they've been happening in kind of fragmented ways. So, you know, Francis is from HP. We all have examples in our offices, maybe when we're back in our offices before pandemic, but, you know, of how photocopiers changed from a time when I was young and you actually had to manage every aspect of your photocopier to photocopiers being on a service basis. Or many people now have, say, natural gas furnaces in their house that they don't buy, but they lease and they're serviced by their utility. So these are examples that are already around us. What's quite different with the circular economy is trying to systematize, bring more of a kind of consistent vision and documentation around this. And in addition, this isn't just the recycling economy of the past. What we're looking at is some the addition of some new technologies, digital technologies, AI, new material technologies that are really catapulting this forward in a way that was only a vision perhaps in some earlier models of what a sustainable economy could look like. We have this growing global momentum towards this new vision. So I'm also very excited by it. I'll say I've been working on environmental issues for 3 decades now, and this is one of the visions that I feel really brings together many different threads of environmental issues that have been operating in isolation from each other in the past.
Thanks, Stephanie. Francis, who is the onus really on to push for a circular economy? Is it on industry players such as yourself? Should this be more on government to step in and regulate it? Does it fall to consumers?
I think it falls to all of us actually, and it's how we buy. As I said, every dollar spent sends a signal into the marketplace. If you were looking for a simple thing to do, it's really to think about that product life extension. So buying it as a service is probably the single biggest thing you can do as an individual, but obviously taking that into the workplace too. You know, we're stuck in these capitalist capital budgets, and you know, can we shift that to an operational expense? Some of the stickiness or the lack of moving into this, because it seems so obvious and brilliant, why wouldn't we all be doing it tomorrow? It's some of our financial systems, as Rita mentioned, aren't really built for this. And it's about collaboration both within business or within organizations and outside of organizations, which we typically haven't done a lot of either. So it's getting us to grow some new muscles and flex them a little better. But yeah, very exciting. And I just wanted to add one point. You know, we're sort of touting this as a somewhat new idea, but really, as Caroline mentioned, it's been around for a long time. We're just dusting it off and everything old is new again, right?
True, very good point. Rita, you talked at length about how climate change and climate risk have become major boardroom topics within the financial sector over the last few years. Is the financial sector also starting to consider the risks of things like companies being affiliated with plastic pollution or the impacts of incoming plastic bans?
I think so, because this represents social risk and reputational risk for financial institutions if they're not thinking about these issues. We have the Canadian banking regulator also pushing financial institutions to think about climate risk and how it affects all aspects of their business. There is an expectation from the regulator that boards and executives think about this in a holistic way, and not just, in terms of how these risks are represented on their balance sheet, but kind of the future risks that they may encounter in their businesses.
We could unpack all these at length, but as we talk about future risks, Caroline, you mentioned that the Indigenous economy, as you said, is the original green economy, the original circular economy that for millennia really has managed resources for the long term. Now, last couple centuries, we've been veering more towards the destructive make, make, and dispose economy. Does it give you comfort now to hear major corporations talking about embracing circular economy principles, or do you have any concerns?
No, thank you. I think that it is giving hope to, when we look at the lower level of just the resource and the nature of how it circulates. I think what is interesting in that is that the opportunity can be there of also how we relate to each other. So a lot of my thinking around economics and Indigenous inclusion has been shaped largely by in whose worldview are we operating from. So as many of you may exist right now within a urban setting, I'm here in Victoria, BC, that when you look outside, the world is reflected back largely from a singular worldview. So the same as our banking systems, product design, development, and it's when we see the expansion of worldview within the constructs and principles of the circular economy is when we're going to see the highest potential of the capacity of what it's actually intended to be able to do. And if a end outcome of that is also a return to our humanities and relating to each other, then that's an element of success that doesn't exist within the current mainstream economy. Thank you.
You talk about the relational economy and the importance of that in the Indigenomics. And I wonder how you see that playing out and kind of meshing in with the current economic model as we transition to something a little bit more holistic. Caroline, if you don't mind unpacking that a little bit more for us.
For sure. So I talked about those within my New Channel worldview about distinct design principles that allow decision making for the long term. So understanding those principles and how those frame decision making, that's really the element of relational economics. So how we are in relationship to time right now, and time less from a linear perspective, but time from that future paced economic reality that we're creating right now. So I think the other panelists referred to that of how our behavior as individual drives outcomes within this circular economy, that it can't be externalized to the federal government or regulated, that the realization of our power as individuals is also formative concept to that idea of a relational economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Stephanie, just to back up a little bit, many people listening, if they heard of the circular economy before today, tend to associate it with eliminating landfill-bound waste. Now, you mentioned some examples like mud jeans and Loop's refill model that do just that. But what about the climate impacts of all this? It's something that Rita touched on as well, talking about climate finance and so on. How does a circular economy benefit the climate?
Thanks for that question. I really feel that it's the missing dimension of the climate conversation, because for every pound of material that we use in a wasteful way, or that we use when we don't need to use it, or that we don't reuse, we create a lot of carbon impact. And one of the ways that we can get towards our, our net zero goals is by really starting to look more stringently at whether all that carbon investment is actually for material that's needed in the economy. So you're basically driving through, by being much more efficient at the materials use phase, you're basically driving efficiencies all the way up the supply chain and getting to carbon reductions through that approach. I will say that within the circular economy paradigm is also an emphasis on using renewable energies as the main energy source for the circular economy as well.
Thank you for that. I think it's an important connection to make that doesn't always get addressed when we talk about the circular economy. We have a few audience questions piling up. This question is from Jim to Francis. Just wondering what the impetus or motivation was to go to instant ink. Was it a carrot or a stick? And carrots and sticks be adopted by government as policies? Good question, Jim.
Okay, so I think it's a number of things, but I'd say a technological advance in the Internet of Things, where the printer can actually order the ink for you. It's got the intelligence and can mesh with our systems. So it's both. And I think from a government perspective, I mentioned that Canadian governments collectively are about 13% of GDP. If we could take them from basically not very much at all, sustainability or circularity embedded in their procurement, to a lot, that would drive the economy faster than almost anything else I can think of. It would happen fast enough for us to meet our Paris targets. It would really change the way the marketplace is being driven. And it's such a powerful tool that we already have in our pockets. We don't need to reinvent something. We just need to put some commitments and some resources into doing this, and we could make this happen quite quickly, I would say. So we have the tools, we just need to do it.
And your preference, carrot or stick?
I think the procurement is a carrot. And I think businesses respond much better to that. We exist to delight our customers. And if our customers are asking us to do things, we're going to jump over backwards to do it. Sticks are a lot harder. They take time. The good companies will step forward and follow a stick, but then you've got to make the laggards come along with you, and that costs money and energy, and time, and we don't have that. In the decade of climate action, we just got to get on and get it done.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Jonas to Rita. In terms of climate conscious investing, I've been disappointed to find a lot of socially responsible investing products with major holdings in corporations like Amazon and Apple that I consider problematic for environmental reasons like packaging and planned obsolescence. Do you know of or see plans for investment products that support companies committed to circular economy principles?
Well, this is a great question, and this speaks to the issue of greenwashing, and also what I pointed out in my talk, which is that we need more clarity in Canada about what we mean when we use labels such as green or sustainable to describe investments. I think the United States and Europe are probably farther along on this curve than Canada is at the present time. But yes, I think that this is something that investors are demanding increasingly because there is this whole ESG movement pushing for companies to be more sustainable. I think a lot will depend on what our securities regulators in Canada eventually do in terms of setting standards for climate disclosures by publicly traded companies. Canada and Canadian companies currently lack American companies on climate disclosures at this point. And, it's really being done on a voluntary basis. And there's no clear standard for what is being disclosed. And this is a real problem because investors need to be able to make smart decisions about where to put their money. And they also need the opportunity to assess their risk appetite for new investments. And they can't really do that if they're kind of guessing as to what is really green, or what might be green and sounds good on paper, but may be actually very high risk as an investment and may not be appropriate for them.
Greenwash has been a perpetual problem in all areas of the environmental movement, and it's surprising it permeates this one as well. Hopefully we have a bit more parameters on here in the future to limit the greenwash in the sector. We have a good question from Larry and Eva to Caroline. What is the time frame for a successful circular economy project? Does it depend on the sector? Are there any examples today other than the Indigenous successes?
Thank you for the question. I think that humanity is looking at a collective now. So defining success within a project means isolating the elements of that success and learning. We're in a learning environment within the circular economy, and it's the learnings that are taken from that where the success is, more so I believe than the end outcome of that. So we look at some of these examples on here of asking, how come, which countries are leaders in this, or which companies are leaders in this, and the foundations of that, of what we learn about that, I think is more important than the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Fred to everyone on the panel. The Ontario government has been presented with the need to demand producer responsibility for products. For example, producer takes them back and recycles them, reuses them, rather than municipalities paying for their blue box programs. How can we push government to demand this process? Who wants to kick that off? Stephanie?
Sure. So I'll say that extended producer responsibility is considered by many to be essentially the cornerstone for the regulatory system that's needed for circular economy. But I really want to underscore that it's far from sufficient for what's going to be needed. We're really talking about systems innovation, system-wide change. So systems innovation across supply chains. There's a great example in Quebec where universities have been working with businesses, with governments, with civil society, trying to look for kind of cross-cutting solutions. And regulations such as extended producer responsibility on their own, while they're very important, and there's very, I think, hopeful conversations in Canada right now about how to greatly strengthen our extended producer responsibility systems, but that's just a fragment of the type of legal, regulatory, and governance changes that are going to be needed to shift towards a circular economy.
Thank you. Francis, how do you approach that issue, the producer responsibility piece as an industry player? Is that something that you guys lobby for when you're in conversation with government? Do you support that system?
Absolutely, and I helped put in the electronics take-back programs across the country, so I have some experience in doing that. But I would still say, as Stephanie said, the regulatory process is slow. When you're dealing with an industry that's as innovative and changing as quickly as ours, it's very difficult to keep up with even product definitions by regulation, right? It's always lagging. So I think it does a certain part of the job, but there's so much more needed. And it's why I have come to the conclusion that procurement is the nimblest tool we have. It's the most enticing tool. It is the biggest carrot for business to be striving for. And, EPR is really fixing a recycling problem, and the circular economy is trying to fix a design problem. So I think we need to go much further upstream. And if you're familiar with the Ellen MacArthur diagram for how the circular economy works, there's a whole bunch of inner loops that have to happen, like this product life extension piece and offering products as a service before you get to that end of life piece, if that makes sense. And you need to design your products to be able to be repaired and for longer product lives and to be recyclable. They're all elements. And unfortunately, with Canadians, we tend to believe that recycling will fix everything. And it's the last piece of the puzzle, not the first.
No, we don't have a lot of time. I know I could keep you here all night. I'm sure you all have other things to do. But I would like to get your thoughts on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it is affecting the circular economy movement in your respective sectors. Will there be lasting repercussions for good or for bad? And how to ensure that the economic recovery plans boost the circular economy moving forward? If you could each answer that from your vantage point. Did you want to kick things off, Caroline?
Sure, thank you. Here in Victoria, BC, we have the Rising Economy Task Force that is looking at both the dashboard of understanding immediate effects and also learning in real time how cross-sectoral learning and responses can happen in a more efficient way. And I think that's the environment that we're in, is that we're building it. So it's like laying the tracks at the same time that we're building this as we go forward within this environment. I've come from, I think that was last year, of being on the Smart Cities jury here in Canada, and really realizing that the level of innovation and the level of system design innovation needs to be considerably raised in comparison to that system design of what we're seeing in other countries. So with that system design lag in innovation, we're also needing to see that efficiency happen within the government as well. And both of those are essentially looking at each other within what this current COVID economic response is right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Rita, could you answer that from your vantage point?
Sure. Well, Canadian banks right now are very concerned about the economic crisis that Canada finds itself in because of sparked by this pandemic. Their main concern at this point is, what's going to happen with provisions for credit losses. So how many loans are going to turn sour, both on the business and on the consumer side? We all know that the CERB program has ended, and there is concern about what is going to happen when people shift to either unemployment insurance or if they try to get back into the workforce. What is going to happen when their kind of payment holidays on mortgages and credit cards or auto loans expires? That is probably the number one priority for banks and banking regulators at this time. I was reading the other day a report by one of the credit rating agencies that said that globally demand for green bonds is expected to slow somewhat this year because of the pandemic. And there have been other impacts as well. The Bank of England was supposed to conduct its first climate stress tests for banks. And that was supposed to be very widely and closely watched by regulators all over the world, including here in Canada, because it was really supposed to kind of set the standard for what these climate tests could look like. Those have been postponed until next year. So I think we're going to see some delay on this issue, or making progress on the issue of a circular economy from the banking perspective until we really get this economic crisis under control.
Thank you, Rita. Francis.
So one of the interesting things for us was the uptick in 3D printing for things like headbands for face shields. 3D print, which of course we're going into heavily, really shortens supply chains, and it has a pretty impressive impact on the circular economy because of the shortening of supply chains, but also for the manufacturing of spare parts. If you think about it, we've all got something at home that has a broken plastic knob on it and therefore it's not working. But if you have an infinite inventory of spare parts in the cloud and you can just print it on a 3D printer nearby you, you can repair that item much faster and more easily. So sort of that uptake of 3D print, distributed manufacturing is pretty exciting from my perspective, and I expect we'll just see that just grow. And it's that big. It's been called the fourth industrial revolution, which is pretty cool. The other thing I think is the way we approach global supply chains and the resilience needed in those supply chains. You know, what are the strategies you take for things like a pandemic that will strike one country, and just as that country's coming back on, it hits somewhere else? It's a bit of a whack-a-mole. Where are your production facilities? You know, if you had two, you know, a traditional supply chain would be, you need duplication. You need one main factory and a backup factory that's making widget A or widget B. And in, you know, in the case of a complicated product like a PC, you need, you know, 100 widgets, so, or 1,000 widgets. You know, it gets very complicated very fast. So I think you'll start to see some different thinking in supply chains, which hopefully can be done with a sustainability lens as well, which will help everybody.
Thank you for that. And Stephanie, unfortunately, we're running low on time, so you're going to close us out. How has the pandemic affected the circular economy movement from your vantage point? And do you worry about lasting repercussions, good or bad? How could we boost the circular economy moving forward?
I'd say it's a learning moment for the circular economy. I think that a lot of what the circular economy is trying to do is address resilience in supply chains, material resilience through better security of feedstock, more diversity of feedstock. But I think that what the pandemic is challenging us to also think about is about social resilience. And I think the big risk is that the business models that we're leaning towards as we look towards a circular economy are the very types of business models with very flexible workforces, gig economy, et cetera, that has been the basis for the vulnerability of so many people in this pandemic. So I see this as a learning moment for us to start thinking more carefully about how we build social and ecological resilience at the same time as we move into the circular economy.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all of our speakers for engaging in this conversation. There is so much more we could say, but unfortunately it's time to wrap up our Q&A. Apologies to all those with questions that didn't get answered. And with that, I will hand it back to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Stephanie Cairns, Francis Edmonds, Rita Trichur, and Caroline Hilton, and of course to you, Adria Vasil, for being our moderator this evening. Yes, there is so much to discuss, but this conversation will continue on in many ways. If you enjoyed tonight's event, we have more scheduled for this fall. In October, you can join us for the Walrus Talks Intelligence, presented by CFAR, exploring minds, machines, and what makes us human. As well, the Walrus Talks Inclusion by TD Bank Group. This is a special two-part event, and it takes a look at accessibility in work, arts, design, and more. Just go to the walrus.ca/events. You can browse our schedule, you can register, and you can also access videos from previous events in the Walrus Talks video room online. Now keep an eye on your inbox because we want to stay in touch, and we're going to send you a follow-up email to this event. And if you'd like to attend future events like this one, the easiest thing to do is to sign up for our newsletter in that email. Thank you again to Guy Cormier and everyone at Desjardins Group for making this conversation possible, and Joanne and Haley at Argyle Public Relations for your support. We'd also like to thank our annual sponsors, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, and Shaw. We'd like to thank the many individuals whose generous donations allow us to bring you in-depth fact-check journalism on issues that matter to Canadians. And if you're not already a donor, please consider supporting our work. There'll be more information on how to do that and why it matters in the follow-up email. But thank you everyone for being a part of this. Thank you, merci, miigwech, and have a great evening.